Turning your mics off.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. The time is now 3:31, so we will open the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Norwood. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Present?
Mayor Schneider,
Present.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Present.
Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
Item B, approval of the agenda. I would like to offer one change to the agenda at item E3, that's new business number 3, the discussion of the next date of our meeting, or date for our next meeting, rather. Currently scheduled for Wednesday, July 3rd.
Okay.
Any other amendments to the agenda? Do I have a second to amend the agenda as stated?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
The agenda is approved. Moving on to item C, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Moving on to item D, public hearing. Tyson Hermes of Hermes Construction Company submitting a preliminary plan under section 1155.13 for a major planned unit development to build a 108-unit apartment development for the property known as 1631 Sherman Avenue, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, Hamilton County, Book 651, page 0049, parcel 0073-00, located within a neighborhood business zoning district with a planned unit development overlay. Do I have a representative?
Yes.
Please.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. Do I need to swear in? Do we need to swear in?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Public hearing.
Well, yeah, I think that's good. Anybody who will be speaking, please raise your right hand and follow Mrs. Town's instructions.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Would you please state your name?
Oh, yes. I'm Tyson Hermes with Hermes Construction.
Thank you.
Hermes Construction is located at 8 Girard Street in Florence, Kentucky. I live at 1270 Brightleaf Boulevard in Erlanger, Kentucky. Not knowing exactly how much would be presented before I got up here, I went ahead and put together a pretty comprehensive overview of the development, the proposed development. If you'd like me to go through it, I'd be happy to do that. I don't know if you've had a chance to review the staff report, but
I think that would be helpful.
go ahead and review it. Okay.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. All right, so what we are proposing is the property is owned by Gaslight Property, and it's the old Fun Factory site on Sherman Avenue, and they are calling it the Sherman Oaks Apartments. So we're seeking the major PUD approval. We've met multiple times with the staff, and we followed their advice and recommendations. We've also submitted for a preliminary zoning review, and there's the number there if you want to follow up on that. And we followed their advice and recommendations as well. It's a 2.49 acre site, and we're showing 35% pervious. And that's what you're seeing down at the lower portion of that slide. And the upper portion is showing previously the Fun Factory site, which had 11% pervious. There are 2 buildings, 108 units total, 54 single-bedroom units, 54 two-bedroom units. So 162 bedrooms and 143 parking spaces. Each building is 4 stories with a half basement. And this is really the only way we found to be able to accommodate the size of the building and the shape of the building and the topography of the site matching with the street. They have to be able to kind of step down as they work across the site. The footprint of the building is just under 15,000 square feet, and the total per building is 67,556 square feet per building. The facades of the buildings integrate the staggered elevations, the varied materials, complementary earth tones, varied window openings, and this is all to gain some architectural interest. We have checked with Norwood regarding the water availability for a development like this, and we've gotten the approval there. We've also gotten the approval from MSD on the sewer availability. Those are the 2 toughest ones, I would say, to be able to acquire. The anticipated customer is a young professional and young families is what we're striving for here. What you're seeing there is on the upper side is a typical single bedroom apartment, and the lower side is a typical 2-bedroom apartment. We've tried to integrate, wherever we have the opportunity, attractive outdoor spaces. We're afforded this on the east side of the site. There is an old, I think it's an old combined sewer that's deep and large and brick, that's way underground there. And we've worked to be able to avoid that sewer as much as possible, and to also keep the buildings far enough away from it that we don't impact that sewer with the weight of the buildings at all. So we've taken advantage of that space and created some gathering spaces and some nice areas where we can have the landscaping, lawns, and patios. Between the buildings, we've also got an opportunity where we're making up grade with slopes. We've got a walkway, smaller spaces for gathering, water features, things like that we are proposing. We're planning to do the entire project in one phase. So the site plan that you've seen, both buildings will be built at once. The parking, the storm drainage, the utilities, everything would all be done at once. And here is a rendering of what we think it would look like from Sherman Avenue. The one thing this does not show in the rendering is that we would propose, and I don't know if I can point to this or not. Maybe I can use the mouse. No? Oh, there it is. If you can see the mouse, we would be proposing signage on this face, which would be pretty close to the entrance of the parking lot on this end of the site, and then on the opposite building, at the opposite side of the site. That is shown on the elevations. It's not necessarily shown on this rendering. But planning on doing the signage to the site on the buildings and not necessarily a monument sign. Here is a typical building plan. We've got in the middle, you're seeing the grade level access, so the access walking in from the parking lot. There would be an elevator in each building, and there would be stairs that would take you downstairs, or the elevator downstairs, and then the elevator to the upper floors, serving 12 units per floor and stairs on each end of the building. I would like to talk more about, if you'd like me to talk more about the landscaping. We are meeting the requirements of Norwood for the landscaping densities and numbers of plantings and trees. One thing I think to note while I'm here is that we've talked about dedicating 7 feet of the, as we look at this plan, down is actually north. So if you look on the left side of the site or the east side of the site, we're talking about dedicating 7 feet of the property to Norwood to allow access from Sherman Avenue directly to the park behind there. And in the staff report, one of the recommendations is that we work with Public Works and Parks and Recreations in Norwood to make sure that we're not creating a sidewalk that leads to nowhere. And I think that's a fantastic idea. We have shown landscaping along that walkway, and we have counted the numbers of plantings in our numbers, but we can very easily pull those off or either way, whatever Norwood would want to do as far as the plantings along that walkway. Here again, coming back to the signage, on the left side is that the facade where I was pointing with the mouse, where we were talking about having a sign. We're well under, these would be pretty large signs, 8 feet by 12 feet signs, and we're well under what would be allowable on the site. And so here again, Gaslight property, Sherman Oaks. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Mr. Hermes?
I have a couple.
Please.
Thanks for coming here. Are these buildings going to be secured access?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, the plan would be that it would be an RFID reader for people to be able to get access to the building, yes.
Okay, will there be a leasing office on site?
There may be in the initial lease up that we would take one of the units and create an office, but eventually, no, not permanently.
All right. And then dumpster access, I think you have dumpster corrals on either end.
Yes.
And let's see, my other question was the Sherman Avenue sidewalk width. Maybe my vision's not good enough, but how wide is that sidewalk along Sherman Avenue?
And I probably should know that right off the top of my head. I'm going to kind of defer back to, it's a 4-foot sidewalk existing.
And how wide are the parking spots?
9 feet.
Those are the notes that I'd made.
Other questions? Will there be planned landscaping for along the sidewalk?
Yes. That is not necessarily shown on the rendering, but on the plan, we are showing. Is that anything you'd care to talk about, Joel?
We are going to refine this, but there is already proposed along the building.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about what sort of landscaping that would be?
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Oh, in the PowerPoint? Yes.
Ma'am, would you please state your name?
Gail Frazier, 7377 Bridgepoint Pass,
Thank you.
Galley Frazier and Associates. Let's see. You don't have my other sheet, did you? The other sheet in the PowerPoint? Yeah, the close-up. No, I had the one that had it here.
Oh, no, I
Can I bring
don't.
those?
Sorry.
Is it in their packet? I do have landscape along there. It's on the second page, which I believe is in your packet. Like a typical. It is still a preliminary plan, so there was going to be some refinement of that. But do you see in the second sheet? Yeah.
I do.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so
Shows slender silhouette sweet gum.
correct, which is a slender silhouette, get about 5 to 6 feet wide, about 30 feet high, really, really narrow, upright tree. Don't worry, it's sterile. It doesn't get the gumballs of a sweet gum. And then there's some junipers and then different types of gravel, but those are down in the well, or, in the, behind the walls that are there, and evergreens along there. The goal is actually that we would probably have no lawn on this whole site, be really very low maintenance, sustainable site, which is really nice. I love having no lawn, which is less pollution, less noise, less disturbance. It's just a really good idea. And I don't have any opportunities to do this, so I'm excited about the sustainability of the site. Do you have any other questions, Noah? Anybody else?
I have nothing further, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Will I have an opportunity to talk again, or I'm not sure if you closed down public comment?
So at the conclusion of your presentation, I'll open it up for comments in favor and then comments opposed. And then we'll take an opportunity to hear from staff.
Okay.
And if there's
I don't have
something
anything
that comes up with staff that would benefit from you addressing it, we'll give you an opportunity
Okay,
for that.
fantastic, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone to speak in favor of the proposed preliminary planned unit development? Anyone to speak in favor of the proposed planned unit development? Anyone to speak against the preliminary planned unit development? Anyone to speak against? Hearing none. Mr. Skelly, I'll ask for staff comments.
Sure. So both in your packet, you have comments from myself and Commissioner Dan Bly. So I can speak, at least on behalf of my comments. You have a 4-page memo dated May 29th. So right off the bat, and for the benefit of everyone here, I do not have any concerns or objections to this application. As you heard from the presentation, myself and Mark Reeves attended at least 2 meetings with the applicant over the last 6 months or so. We offered some suggestions, both in terms of the zoning, in terms of the neighborhood commercial for the PUD, the process, and just, personal things or pet peeves that we would look at. Happy to see a lot of those were included. One of the big issues from the get-go is providing for 2 means of access to this development, which I believe wasn't in the prior one from several years ago. So with that, I went ahead just for the benefit of the Planning Commission and eventually Council, because ultimately a PUD application is required to be recorded. So I structure it in a way that ultimately the conditions of approval will be then useful for the law department to kind of use that massaging to prepare for a recording document. So in the 4 pages, there's about 15 either comments or questions or suggestions that are offered that you could read for yourself. And I think for the most part, it's either clarifying to the applicant or also helping for both the Planning Commission meeting and ultimately for Council to review this, just to kind of clarify things one way or the other. You probably read in Dan Bly's comments similar sort of issues, and I guess the big ones noted in his 2 comments were open space, which is a requirement part of the PUD, and just getting some more clarification about that. But again, Mr. Bly's not here. I don't view personally his letter as objecting to it, just a matter as to additional information that he would like to see. So, do you have anything to add? For Dan? No? So. But at least to me, both from the staff comments, and you also have a letter from Clint Zimmerman with regards to the servicing, the fire department.
There,
And again, obviously they're here, they're probably the best we add to comments, but like at least of me personally, I don't have any objections to this development. So like I said, the applicant has been cooperative with us. Everything, and again, some people might view the comments saying, oh, that's a lot of comments. I think I've prepared sometimes 50 comments and still endorsed it, because to me, the nature of the development, as long as it's not substantive, that it changes significantly the imprint or the gravity of the nature. Like if we had concerns, oh, you need to lob off the section, that takes away 8 units, it's a non-starter. So that's why, whether there's 15 comments or 150, if it doesn't impact the negative nature of the site, the layout, et cetera, to me, it's just incidental type things. So again, reiterate, at least from my staff comments, I don't have any objections to this. I have a number of comments, suggestions that I'm happy to entertain and discuss further, but.
Questions for Mr. Skelly?
I do. On Dan Bly's letter, Mike, make sure I understood what you said. It seemed like there were 2 items that didn't meet the criteria of a minor PUD,
Major PED.
a major PUD. And I guess when you say there, so what am I missing? And maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Sure, which letter of Dan Bly's you're looking at?
May 23rd.
Okay. So at least for the first sentence, I think he's just acknowledging what the applicant type is, which is, again, it's a major planned unit development. And as we discussed, we're looking at the preliminary phase at this point.
Correct, right.
The second one, similar to my comment, which is number 7, it's just asking for clarification. So the way the ordinance read is that 25% of the gross site needs to be provided for common open space. And then it's a matter of determining if it's something that is necessary, or is the city willing to accept this land or keep it as private open space like Factory 52. So that's kind of related with it. But I think.
So wait for final plans? Is that really what you're getting at?
Kind of, but I think, again,
I'm
for
okay with that.
a major plan, that should be clarified as part of the current preliminary, because it's fundamental. So to me, I think it's saying
So it's-
precisely calculate what is meeting the 25%.
Can we ask the applicant if he's going to achieve 25% or not? Okay, I mean,
Sure.
you folks have had meetings with him. I don't know what you conveyed, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of balancing my
Sure, this is like the first time, like, again, we actually, as part of this hearing, that I'm looking at the actual plan, seeing
Okay.
what is the
But,
layout.
no, it kind of fits the next item, is the same type of thing. It looks like Dan's disagreeing with the applicant on the amount of impervious material, right? I mean, both of these are really, I think the applicant can say it's really not an issue. We can meet the letter of the law in the major development PUD. But again, I thought you would be in those meetings with
Yeah,
the
it's like,
proposer, so.
maybe I just read it a different way or more favorably, because to me, the last comment talks about additional detention facilities seem likely and would need to be determined by the city engineer. So when I mentioned earlier what triggers a conditional approval versus a denial or a postponement, saying, hey, is there something of substance that would be so significant to radically change the footprint, that to me would be a red flag.
Okay.
Because to me, ultimately, the applicant's engineer saying, yeah, that's within reason, we can work with that. But I think what I heard is that they're making a position or argument that the proposed maximum impervious is significantly less than what was there before as part of the fun factory.
Okay.
So beyond that, again, it's left up to the engineers to figure out, are they compliant or not?
Okay, well, and no, I did just have a general procedural question. There is already a PUD overlay on this NBD. do we procedurally need to remove that ordinance? I'm not a lawyer. How do you, because right now, if we would move forward with this, we'll be putting a PUD in a PUD.
No, we're not adding another overlay. The overlay already exists.
Okay, so are we,
There was,
now you're gonna answer my question, then shouldn't we be looking at that PUD, whether or not this application meets that PUD application? You've answered the question, because I've never seen that PUD that was in 2014.
Yeah, we should be looking to see whether this meets the requirements of the planned unit development. That's correct.
Not necessarily the 2014 PUD.
There are, standards are laid out in the Norwood Code for the specific elements that it should meet. One of those is that 25% open spaces requirement.
Okay. So we can move forward with the preliminary drawing for a new PUD.
Correct. And
Okay.
we are evaluating it against the criteria in the code.
Yes, definitely. I understand that. Okay.
I guess, on a similar note, my question would be, as I look at this, it does not appear to me that it meets that 25% requirement for a common open space.
That's, I guess, my question. I don't have definitive, without myself as a staff member going through it in detail, calculating everything to make that assertion. So I think in the note, similar to Dan Bly's, it was just that having those detailed areas calculated by their design, or the engineer, the RLA, presented to us, and then if there's any kind of net out, just being clear about that as well. And then ultimately, once you have those very granular level of facts, you, the planning commission, make, yeah, they're providing what's reasonable for 25%.
Mr. Hermes, are you able to speak to that?
I would love to. So I think we had a little bit of confusion, especially, when we initially submitted this, we said that the open space calculation was much more than the impervious area. In a discussion with, over the phone, we had been told that open space was anything that wasn't building. And so we were counting the parking lots in that space. We also weren't necessarily up to speed on the conveyance of those open spaces. We've looked into that more now. And I think our take on, there's two ways of doing that. And one is turning it over to the city. The other option is to turn it over to an LLC or a bonding agent or something to that effect. That would be more the route that we would be going. So I guess I'm still a little unclear as far as what the open space is that is required. Again, I would still be counting it as pervious ground. So I know the requirement is 25%, and what we count as pervious is 35%.
Okay. So what we have in our code is common open space. This is section 1155.08. Mountain character with respect to residential planned unit developments, at least 25% of the total land of the proposed development permitted by this section shall be dedicated to public or private open space, or a combination of public and private open space or recreational facilities, exclusive of dwellings, streets, parking areas, and single-family residential lots. So the way that I read that is the parking area would not be able to be counted toward that 25%?
Agreed.
And so taking that into consideration, would that put you under that 25% requirement?
I would say no.
No?
Because we would be counting these areas at the ends of the buildings, the areas between the buildings. I would also then be counting, I would think sidewalks would fall into that, which I was not counting that, the 35%. So, I don't think there would be any difficulty with us achieving the 25%. And again, it would be private, for the private use of these residents. The letter from Dan Bly on May 23rd, I'm seeing for the first time today. So apologize for not being up to speed on that.
Oh. Questions?
I guess, Mike, one question I have on that, going along on Dan Bly's letter as well, there was a question about the fire department access, and I see the letter from our assistant fire chief that they couldn't really make out the schematic, wasn't able to make a determination on this property, just offered generalities up. Has that been able to be reviewed to where we actually have a response from fire department specific now?
Yeah, I would say since we have two representatives here, are the best to ask them.
Assistant Fire Chief Brody Cianciolo. The plan we got was the smaller version. Wasn't able to really do any calculations off of that. So these were just general kind of comments on any plan like this. I'm sure they can kind of go over what the actual measurements are, but basically our comments were the road basically around the back of the property needs to have an unobstructed width of at least 20 feet for fire department access. The turns, I guess the two turns going through the back of the building need to have a minimum inside radius of 25 feet and a outside radius of 45 feet. The roads, so it's a parking lot, but it's still a fire department access road. Needs to be designed and maintained to support imposed loads of fire apparatus. So our heaviest truck being about 77,000 pounds. And then I know there's some grade issues with this property. Again, the plans didn't really specify what those were, so I just made general comments about ingress or angles of approach for departure. And they can't be any more than 8 degrees. And then I don't know what the actual parking lot grade is. There's some code stuff for that as well. And then just so that as part of this and so the developers understand that the back of that building probably will have to have at least one, if not two, fire hydrants placed on it. So.
Is it fair to say that there's still some additional things that need to be evaluated from the fire department's perspective?
Yeah, I would think so. Just basically, when we get a more definitive plan, we can better evaluate it.
Other questions for the assistant chief while he's at the podium? Thank
You
you.
should make him spell his last name.
Tom McCabe, I'm the fire chief of Norwood. Within the plan, we also noticed the detention areas that are listed underneath the pavement, we have some issues with that. We also have some concerns regarding the location of dumpster corrals, just because we, from experience, knowing that those access points then get choked off. So that would be something we'd also want to consider. So from having a planning document that we can actually take measurements off of and do those calcs would be very helpful for us. So we can at least weigh in on that. Obviously, the fire protection piece will come in once planning is done and designs are submitted. That's where we come in to focus with these plan reviews. But the actual access to the building is pretty much all we really comment on right now. That's all I have to add.
Thank you, Chief. Discussion by the commission members.
I'll entertain a motion.
I will entertain a motion.
I would make a motion that we continue the public hearing until the next meeting for this preliminary planned unit development.
Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
So the motion to continue?
Yes. I will continue the hearing to the next planning commission meeting. Well, it is tentatively scheduled at this point for July 3rd, but I have added it as item E3 on new business to make sure commission members are available. So we will be all finding that out together here in just a moment.
Towards the end of June.
So is there some guidance for them that you want more information back from them towards the preliminary, or?
Yeah, we will definitely have some discussion with them. I believe Mr. Skelly's notes in addressing the additional concerns from the fire department. Moving on to, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we go ahead and move to item E3 so that we don't hold you all up. So our next meeting is scheduled for July 3rd, understanding that that may be a difficult day for some folks to appear. Wanted to see if that was the date we wanted to maintain, or if we would like to move that to the previous Wednesday, that's June 26th.
'26 would be preferable for me.
I'm okay with it.
I can do this.
I can't not do the 26th, I could do the 3rd, but I can't, I apologize.
I will be here on the 3rd, so if we would like to do the 3rd, we can do that.
If we have to. It's fine, I'll be here.
Okay, well, we don't need a motion because we're not changing anything. So our next meeting will be July 3rd, 3:30 PM. Okay, moving on to item E1, new business, update from the Law Department on potential legislation that could be passed regarding marijuana and CBD and future legislation for the city to consider.
Keith Moore, Norwood Law Director. Tracking the things that are going on, the legislation, the regulations that are coming down, the potential legislation. If you're going to talk about zoning, there's really nothing from the state that would impact what I think zoning would be. The one thing would be they passed the tobacco and tobacco products statute that says it preempts every local regulation. I don't think that would apply to zoning. Like, we want to decide it's going to be here instead of over here. That's not the kind of thing that would generally interfere, because the state has passed a lot of things that preempt local regulation of items. The one I remember in particular was scrap metal. We passed an ordinance, and like 2 weeks later, the state preempted everything because they didn't like us to do it. But it had no impact on zoning restrictions on where it would go. I will say one thing as far as locations go, the regulations are not final yet, but they are close to final. I don't think they're quite final yet, is on the medical marijuana, or not the medical, the adult use marijuana. The first round of those 180, I think, statewide permits for retail locations will be limited to the existing medical marijuana locations. And after that, then they will move on to open it up to other locations that may want to open adult use retail locations. One of the restrictions in that, in addition to the 500 feet of a school, park, that kind of thing that is part of the medical marijuana, is that a new location cannot be within 1 mile of an existing location. So that's a new one for the adult use. So I don't know what the measurements would be in Norwood as far as how far away a mile from the two we have would be. I mean, so it may not be relevant to add them, to restrict them to any place else. But if the Planning Commission wants to look at restricting locations, there's nothing on the state side that would prevent that. Other than if they're already here, they're grandfathered in as far as the medical, the medical is in. The one thing, and it's come up with, I know that Dan's had some questions about it, but I would ask the Planning Commission look at defining the adult use marijuana sales as to what kind of a use that is under our code. I know that we kind of defaulted to the medical marijuana. Well, we're going to treat this the same way we would a pharmacy. But the adult use doesn't really match kind of that. So for the staff, it would be helpful to know, okay, which is this, define it as, is it straight retail? Is it, I don't even know what the possible categories are, but to define it as one of the uses either allowed or not allowed under our code. I don't know if anybody got any questions?
Mr. Moore, my understanding is that marijuana retail businesses will be allowed to be limited by number. Is that correct?
That is correct. The city can decide we're not going to have, we're only going to have 2, we're not only going to have 3. We can, put a limit on it, on the total number within the city, yes.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Moore?
When you say limit, is that specific for medical and recreational? Can we do it combined as just, say, 2 we got now? It could be 2 period, or does it go break down a little more?
Off the top of my head, I would assume it'd be for both, but I would really have to take a deep dive to figure out if that's the case. Yeah, I think that we can limit the number. Well, we're going to have 2 within the city of Norwood, whether it's medical or adult use. Of course, the existing medical have a right we can't stop to also become the adult use general retail sale.
Other questions?
I would let the planning commission know that I've received a minimum of 20 to 30 phone calls asking me if the city has a moratorium, does the city, and I've just told them it's in committee, or it's in planning commission, because I don't have anything to tell them.
Any further questions?
Oh, just,
Sigma?
if I could, so with the medical, it was they wanted a certification from the city, is this allowed or is it not allowed under the current zoning? My understanding is the process for the adult use will be, they may call and ask, but the certification will happen after their application has been approved, and then state staff will be the people that contact the city to make sure and to do the measurements. Is it within a mile of another one? Is it, within 500 feet or whatever? Is they're going to be much more proactive on the state side. They're going to be in charge of getting that certification or whatever it is from the building department. So,
That's why the question
Florida doesn't mean they're not going to still call, right? No.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Appreciate the update.
Absolutely.
Moving on to item E1, letter dated May 16th, 2024, from Steve Mumbach, Senior Vice President, Ambulatory Services, Real Estate, Tri-Health, regarding 4850 Smith Road, located within a central business district zoning district, requesting a waiver of the PUD designation. That letter was included in your packet. And Mr. Mumbach?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Mombach, 400 Pike Street, Cincinnati, 45202.
Thank you for coming to see us today.
Thank you. I'm a Senior Vice President with Tri-Health, and we are seeking a PUD exemption for a minor modification that we're bringing to the city of a PACE program. PACE program, just to give, can I give a second? PACE program is a program for senior adults who are 55 years and over that have 2 assisted ADLs, they call it, meaning assisted device living, that you need help with. And basically, these are folks that are from Hamilton County. The state of Ohio basically gave 7 counties the ability to have a PACE program. So Hamilton County got 1. Tri-Health, along with 2 other partners, the Council of Aging of Southwest Ohio and Edenbridge, which is a company from Boston, got the competition. It was competition to get it. Tri-Health certainly came out nicely because we had a PACE program for those that remember in the city of Norwood called Senior Link. We had it here for almost 10 years until the state of Ohio decided that their fee structure was going to change. And at that point, Tri-Health, we weren't making anything on it, but bottom line is the fee structure really changed the whole dynamics of a program. You have to at least break even. And so now the new way they're doing it is makes more sense, has less participants, and so we really enjoy the city. We have 3 major operations already in the city of Norwood, actually 4, and we thought, we recommended to Edenbridge that we bring a 5th one. So we found some space on 4850 Norwood Smith Road. It's about 15,000 square feet. feet. And most of the work that we're doing is inside. The only modification we want to do, and it's a minor modification, is just have a separate entrance into this space, because this is an office building, and we didn't want to go through the main lobby, so we just want to go straight into our space. And there's the ability to do that right outside there. And then we wanted to put a covered awning so that for the seniors that are coming in, if it's raining or snowing, that they're not going to get wet or anything like that. So that's what we're seeking. Our plans will be done, 90% of the set will be ready on July 16th.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that entrance will look like? Does that make modifications to the parking lot area?
Yes, so that's the entrance I'm talking. Yes, so that will be, so when you come into, I didn't know I could have slides, so I apologize. But when you come into the building, there's one main entrance that you come in, and where our space is immediately to the right, and we're just going to add an entrance right over there to the right. So leaving the main entrance for everyone else in the building, this way the participants and the staff can go straight into the center. And that is the only thing that we're doing. Everything else that's going on in the space is going on inside the space.
Questions?
Just looking it up.
Pretty simple and straightforward to me. Be nice if we had slides.
I'd be willing to entertain a motion.
We'll make a motion to request a waiver.
We'd make a motion to waive.
A motion to
waive the requirements.
to
of
waive the
PUD.
requirements. And this would go in front of council once that motion is made?
No.
It's just a motion
No.
and an approval by
By planning
planning
commission.
commission. Okay, I will make that motion to waive the requirement.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Sewer, you look like you have some
Discussion before we, because our PUD code says on a PUD overlay, if we're not, we as a commission can make that modification without going to council. It's the way I read it.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we can waive the requirement to go through the PUD modification process.
Because of, it's a PUD overlay in a zone or use is acceptable. Is that correct? This is,
Yes.
I'm trying to think
Yes.
what zone this is.
This is Central Business District,
Central Business, CBD, okay.
and it is allowable in the underlying. That's
And
correct.
if it's allowable in the underlining, then it does not have to go to council, and we are, as a commission, can make that modification.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now,
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
yes.
Thank you all so much, appreciate it.
Thank you. Moving on to item F1, old business, discussion on vape shops. Now, I apologize, I was not at the previous meeting in May. Mr. Skelly, could you help catch me up there?
Sure. There really wasn't too much discussion on, I guess, the last amendment that was circulated. We had dated April the 4th. I think it was more that the planning commission was still looking at the document and determining in terms of its merits. I believe one of the big issues that was discussed, and we had a presentation by the law director, was there any potential inference with vape shops, as we're simultaneously now, we're going to be confronting very shortly, dealing with the recreational marijuana. So the way I interpreted it, there was nothing necessarily raised as concern with the April 4th draft, the revised draft, or anything beyond that. It was more just making sure we have this potential lingering issue with regards to recreational marijuana, how does that impact the vape shops? And at least from my 2 cents worth, it's really hard to say. Everything you heard from the law director is identical to what I'm reading. The existing medicinal marijuana dispensaries probably have first dibs on having a dual license. I don't know realistically how many more we could get in terms of related to that, or even separately. Obviously, I believe on May 10th, the state was finalizing the guidelines for the, as they're terming it, adult recreation marijuana. But beyond that, you know, I can't give you a definitive yes or no. Will you see vape shops entering the market and selling that? I can tell you for a fact, having visited these places as part of the drafting the ordinance and preparing the actual background study, some are definitely right now selling CBDs and related, and some of the non-classified chemicals right now. But I would probably guess that, you know, certain vape shops could become adult recreational marijuana. So, you know, I wish I could be more clear in terms of having about at least the ordinance that you see in front of you takes a stab at least regulating that particular use, and at least for the benefit of this body, since the moratorium doesn't expire until like the first or second week in August, we still have time.
So is the suggestion that we would modify the ordinance we have been reviewing, discussing vape shops, and make that inclusive of adult use marijuana retailers?
Yeah, I would say I would really like to have a more in-depth discussion with senior staff about that, including the law department, because to me, I think we could write it in. But that's depending on how to best bring it in. That's my only confusion, how to make it, you know, both lawful, logical, that we could do that. So at this point, we regulate medicinal marijuana as a pharmacy and adult recreation as a whole kettle of fish. I really don't know what the best way to regulate that is. So, but I think at least on vape shops on their own can stand quite well. So.
Questions or discussion by the commission? Would we like to make a motion on the vape shop ordinance? Or continue that for further discussion?
The question was when the moratorium ran out, and we wanted to have something in place before that moratorium ran out, correct?
Right.
And the moratorium runs out the end of this summer?
I believe it's August the 8th.
And so to
Do we want to continue discussing it?
To make this change, we would need to have a public hearing at the next planning commission meeting, is that correct?
Make any change?
Make any change.
And then it goes to council.
And then it would go to council.
They have to have a 30-day notice.
And so that would put them at their first meeting in August, which would be just after the August 2nd date.
If you could refresh my memory, Noah, the reason for the reason for the moratorium, the basis of the moratorium was, did council feel like there were, or staff, feel like there just were too many opening up?
So there were a number that opened up, and we did not have, or do not have, them specified in our zoning ordinance. So where they can go, how many of them there can be, there's not really a
drafted.
regulation on that.
Okay.
And so the moratorium was placed to allow an opportunity for staff and the planning commission to evaluate the
Okay,
issue and
thank you.
make a recommendation or to make no recommendation.
And we have a draft in front of us
Correct.
that Mike has researched and put together.
Correct.
So the question is, do we want to move forward on that? Do we want to wait one more month, and do we have enough time to wait one more month?
If we discuss this at the July meeting, we put this on for a hearing we place it for a hearing after discussion at the July meeting, that would set it for the first planning commission meeting in August, at which point the moratorium would have expired before any legislation would get to council. Looks like Mr. Moore has something to say.
Just as a general principle, if you have a moratorium, you can extend it as long as you're actively working on it. If you just pass a moratorium and then don't do anything, then you can get in trouble. But if it's still under consideration and discussion, and then the moratorium could be extended.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Would that require a letter for planning commission?
I think it's just an ordinance, just like the moratorium was passed.
That maybe,
But it sounds like we would all probably prefer to have a little more time to make consideration of this.
I make a motion that we continue this discussion on vape shops to the next meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
No, I mean, yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Seward.
Yes.
Motion passes. Discussion on vape shops will be moved to our July 3rd meeting.
Chairman, is there just a question too? I'm tired of asking questions. What should we as the commission be doing between now and the next meeting to help continue to move forward? Unfortunately for me, I don't know a lot about vape shops.
If you have questions or concerns about the ordinance or would like additional explanation, my best advice is to sit down with Mr. Skelly, schedule an opportunity to talk with him.
Mike, okay.
Or fire off an email if you've got questions and would like a written
Because the
response.
proposal would be we'd have that ordinance in front of us at that meeting and decide if we're going to move forward with the ordinance as written or as modified.
And
Is that,
if Mr. Skelly, in his discussions with commission members, feels that there's changes, he would be able to make recommendations based on those discussions at the next meeting.
okay, so that's the next step. Whether or not it moves forward after the July meeting, it depends on how many comments and issues, et cetera. Okay.
Correct.
Or we could extend the moratorium at that time.
I think we will, I will make a request to council to extend that moratorium to allow us more time to consider this.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to item F2, draft ordinance, scribe changes to the Norwood codified ordinances, part 11, planning and zoning code. Proposed changes are included in your ordinance. May 6, 24 is the date at the top, 3-page document. Mr. Skelly,
Sure.
you would explain?
If I could direct the planning commission members to that 3-page draft ordinance, and then what I will do, I'm going to be handing out something and then walk commission members through hopefully a better explanation of this. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the same one where the assistant director came up and said, I don't, it's giving me too much power, right?
Thanks. So the first page that you have in the handout on the top right corner, it indicates page 100 and F as in Frank. And that's actually related to, on the second page of the draft ordinance, section 3, which is dealing with motels and lodging. So what you see on that chart is a stripe that highlighted through the term lodging, hotel and motel. And you can see for yourself through the various residential zones that there's 4 X's for the R1, R2, R3, and RMX. When you turn the page and look at the next chart, which is 100G as in George, when you go through midway, you see the term motel and then lodging. However, in that particular case, under R3, you see P indicating that that would be permitted. Now, the explanation for this is that when, about 2 years ago, we were working towards transitioning for having an overall chart to make it more convenient for people using it, I brought all terms over into this thing, whether they were correct, incorrect, etc. So the point for my doing that task was to bring forth the uses and not to further do any editing beyond what the ordinance was already allowing for. So not changing any sort of permitted rights, conditional use rights, it's bringing it over as is. Now, the purpose of this particular ordinance is start to going back and cleaning up certain things or certain confusions or certain duplicative words. Now, in this particular section, as you can read, the recommendation is actually to delete what you see on the second page, 100G, in that entire line, motel, lodging, would be deleted, in the sense that we already have the umbrella term, which is lodging, hotels, motels, etc., prohibited in all residential zones. So that's the purpose of section 3, essentially, is for convenience sake and clarity that, specifically as you saw with motel and lodging, that would be entirely removed. And part of the reasoning for this is from our earlier discussions with regards to short-term rental. So in the past, 3 years ago, prior to any amendments, something of a short-term rental was still being discussed and debated how it was going to be treated. Typically, if it was considered lodging, then it would fall with that, and typically in the R3 zone is permitted. So again, the sole and only purpose of section 3 is just to remove that second clarification for motel and lodging. So before I move on, I just want to ask, is everyone clear on that?
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Skelly.
Okay. So the next thing I'd like to clarify, and again, I apologize if this sounds very rudimentary, but the reason I'm bringing it up because there was some concern as to what this particular ordinance may or may not be doing. So section 2 primarily deals with public elementary schools. So if we turn to the third page, which is 100H as in Harry, and this is a little more convenient because you can see it side by side, we have a definition for public or private elementary school. And essentially, I don't want to say the old ordinance, but before we start working on the chart, in the R1 zone, based on an amendment that was drafted in 2003, a public or private elementary school was inserted as a permitted use. Now, obviously, with the age of our municipality, we have schools that might be in existence for close to 100 years. But in 2003, it was indicated or passed that it would be provided for in R1 and consistent with the rest of the zones. Now, in 2013, the city came up with what I would call an omnibus or institutional definition. So under public use, and again, we've been finding our ordinance right now, it pretty much included all institutional or civic uses. Post offices, elementary schools, junior high, high school, and I believe probably at the time, the intent seemed to me to make it more all-encompassing, a little bit clearer, that those sort of institutional uses would be bundled together. However, at least for the residential zones, it would be permitted as a conditional use. And in doing so, those institutional uses, new uses, at least the way I would view it, would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for approval after a public hearing. So the intent of Section 2 is essentially to eliminate public or private elementary school as defined and listed separately, and in its place have the existing public uses, which, as you can see, for R1, R2, R3 are conditional uses. So my belief, that provides even more protection for the city, because then each of those new uses coming to the city or changing, if they wanted to add, I don't know, if you would have a elementary school and they decided they're going to have part of it for junior high age school kids, that would have to go to the BZA for approval because we're introducing a new use. So you could say a school is a school is a school. However, we do have a difference between elementary, junior high, and high school. So again, the purpose of Section 2 is to remove public or private elementary school in favor of the more all-encompassing public use.
Public use would also include the private elementary school?
Correct.
Questions for Mr. Skelly?
I have a comment.
Mr. Mayor?
I feel that public and private elementary school, the way it is stated, cannot be misconstrued. You can't read that and not recognize it as saying public and private elementary school. Clearly, concisely, it's written right here, no doubt about it. The one that you're talking about, public uses, in quotation marks, includes school, prior or public service facility, makes it less clear to me. And I think that our forefathers, the people who wrote this, had reasoning to put it in that specific way to make it as clear as possible. So I wouldn't be an advocate of removing that.
If I could offer a little bit of clarity to that, I had the same thought myself. Section 1111.111, public uses as defined as including post offices, museums, meeting halls, public parks, elementary and secondary schools, public libraries, police stations, fire stations, community centers, recreation centers, cultural, visual, and performing arts centers, lodge halls, labor union halls, and offices, meeting places of civic, education, religious, welfare, and philanthropic organizations, governmental buildings and structures open to the public, and other like and similar uses, but not including public land or buildings devoted solely to the storage and maintenance of equipment, materials, and to the public service facilities. Quite a mouthful.
That's great. So you're going to remove where it says public and private elementary schools, and it's going to say public uses, and then you're going to state, see section 1111.111 of the Ohio Revised Code, and they can go from, instead of making this chart, which is what it's supposed to be, which is useful and quick, basically a quick document that you can look through and make another, now you're supposed to go to 1111.111 to figure out whether it actually, so you're
And I'll give you it's usually, you are correct. You can read something and have a completely different interpretation. This one actually was raised by one of the schools that we have in town, where they do have elementary, secondary, et cetera, all together on a smaller property. And they were looking at expanding potentially, putting some sort of recreation facilities on that property. And they were debating precisely say, well, fine, there's confusion here because this permits just the elementary, which they have, but it was also the school that they were operating included middle school and high school age kids. And in terms of what they were hearing, say, well, for this you're okay, but this we're gonna have to take you for a separate hearing. So to me, to simplify it and keep it consistent, I was trying to capture everything under one.
But by making them conditional uses from a building department staff, they now can only expand a percentage in a conditional use. They wouldn't be able to just expand carte blanche if Norwood View wanted to add a whole nother building. Right now, they're a permitted use. But if, as a conditional use, they would only be able to expand 25%.
Sure, and that's, I guess, begs the question. So if you have,
But they would be allowed on Montgomery Road in the office zone or the general business district as a permitted use. Just as a point.
yeah,
I think as I look at the question of whether or not to maintain this as written on the chart, the point about a school operating both an elementary school and a secondary school could cause some confusion. You have public or private elementary school permitted in the R1, 2, 3, and RMX, but not permitted in the other zones, where it is essentially just the opposite. The secondary schools are permitted in the other zones, but only conditionally in the residential. So if you have that school existing in an office zone where you have elementary and secondary, and they wanted to expand the elementary, it doesn't appear that they'd be able to do that. Am I reading that correctly? They'd only be able to expand the secondary education portion based on what it says here.
that could be an interpretation. So, like me, again, school is a school. I do believe, and as you heard from the mayor, a public or private elementary school is probably less worrisome, maybe for traffic or for other issues of the size, than let's say a high school.
I would agree that I think a public or private elementary school is different in character than a secondary school.
The main concern in terms of one of the operators for, like I said, in this case it was the religious school, asking that question, say, how do we navigate the approval process for the one or the other side? It's like, to me, it's like, well, fine, again, just seeking clarity. So at this point, I don't think there's any conflict because, as you heard, it's calling out a very precise activity where the public uses is more embraced for a lot of other institutional uses.
Mike, I know you've spent a lot of time on this. I just have.
Actually, no, it's like.
I know not lately,
Yeah, I'm
you
just-
worked on,
yeah,
but
I just
on the
want-
very first page,
Yeah.
now that I am looking at it, which I probably should have done before, the second line down, how does that second line? It says elementary school, public or private. On your first page.
You're talking a handout or?
Yeah, your handout,
Okay,
100F.
yes. Yeah, so I think that's just duplicated because in that section, we have a portion that is dealing with the residential, primarily non-residential. So those are the things, again, and there's many more
That's
as
another-
we've discussed.
Another redundancy.
But you've combined two definitions in this also, public use and public service and facility. Those are two separate definitions. One 1111.109 says public service facility.
Yeah, so if you look at the definition for public service facility, 1111-109, I'll just read it. means any building or structure used or designed to be used for any public utility, public land, or buildings devoted solely to the storage and maintenance of equipment and materials. So to me, I'm thinking essentially a public works yard, something of that sort.
Other questions for Mr. Skelly? Discussion? I think for my part, I would advance this ordinance without section 2, strictly dealing with the motel change.
Advance it to council?
Well, to a public hearing, if at that point to council. Yes, Mr. Skelly.
If that is the favor of the commission, what I would like to do is talk further with Gary, because there might be other editing issues that we see throughout the document that may be worthwhile bringing them forward at one point. Because to me, I'd hate to waste anyone's time for making one minor correction, which is really all this is.
Okay.
So when this whole thing started, as you recall, we included a very robust section allowing for the law department to take on any kind of future changes. So I believe you heard from Tim and Gary that was a bridge too far. They didn't want to take on any sort of kind of legislative matter where, even though we could probably articulate and debate and argue intelligently, hey, yeah, sure, it's a minor, just fix it. But in fairness to both this body and council, I prefer, if I'm going to occupy their time, I would almost get like a laundry list if we can assemble one together and come back to this body with a more complete list about corrections.
I would agree with that.
So again, time is money, both for staff, and it's also, we have to advertise it, which is money as well. So I would rather capture a lot more things.
Okay, so unless there's further discussion, we'll count that agenda item as discussed, and we will allow Mr. Skelly to bring that back when appropriate.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Any other business? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinter,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We are adjourned at 4:49. Thank you, everyone.